Assalamu alaikum and good evening. Welcome to another program of the Classics show. I am your host, Shabnum Riaz. Today we have a very special program that we've prepared for you, and it's something that I'm personally really looking forward to the discussion, because we've had a discussion before we're going on air right now as well. We're going to talk about literature and Islam, the relationship between the two. What is today's Islam? What should it be, this great religion, what is the real essence behind it? And so we have a very special guest for today's program, very delighted to introduce Dr.Umar Faruq Abdullah, who is an American Muslim scholar, educator, author, and you're working in the US, Canada, and around the world. Right now you're here with us in Pakistan. Thank you so much for being part of the show.
Thank you very much. I'm very honored to be here, very happy to be here.
Likewise. And the conversation that we've had before we're actually recording the program, that was absolutely fantastic as well. And so many things, so many questions lead to more questions. So, let's talk about right now. I would ask you, when did you come to Pakistan the first time? What, how has your experience been? And tell us about your first journey here.
I first came to Pakistan in the early part of January 1982. I came here for a Seerah conference, which was held in Rawalpindi.
Okay.
And I've been back a number of times since then, and I really enjoy coming to this country, and I've benefited from coming here very much.
Okay. So let's talk about your journey as well throughout life. Your education, and then how that led you onto the journey towards discovering Islam, and then the actual converting. How did all this come together?
I was raised as a Protestant in the United States, a Protestant Christian. And in the church that I was brought up in, learning the doctrines of the church was required. We called that catechism. So I memorized the catechism. And I cared a lot about religion and about the church. However, after I became officially part of the church, which works differently with Christians than Muslims, we call this confirmation.
Right.
My father, who was a scientist, and he was also a Christian, but he was a professor and a scientist. He was walking with me one day after church, and I'm a boy. And he turned to me and he said, "Do you truly believe in the Trinity?"
Right.
I'd never doubted it in my life. But because my father asked me that question, then I had no answer. And I looked to him in shock. And I'm saying in my heart, "Do you not believe in the Trinity?" And my father told me a story about a missionary who went to China and tried to convince a sage that God was one, categorically, but he's also three. And essentially that broke the hold of the Trinity on me. In fact, I went to my pastor the same week and told him I had doubts about the Trinity. I was about 12 years old.
Okay.
And I began to drift away from Christianity from that time. And then I became convinced that God was one. However, I didn't know where to turn. And I didn't feel that I could accommodate my belief in Christianity in any form that I knew, and I wasn't attracted to any other religion, and Islam actually didn't occur to me. When I went to graduate school then in Cornell University to study English literature, I had to take a class in African American literature.
Okay.
And one of the required books was the autobiography of Malcolm X.
Right.
And reading that book had a huge impact on me. And part of that impact was that Islam is the religion that you need, and it is the religion that will fulfill you. And I'm thankful to God that almost immediately after reading that book, I embraced this faith, and I embraced it with great satisfaction,
So
great personal satisfaction.
Okay, so in that book, the autobiography of Malcolm X, that's where you found many answers to the questions that were going on inside your mind, and that exactly that time, that movement, the fight, you know, the civil rights movement, the emergence of Black Pride as well, and you know, Malcolm X as well coming out with. It's basically also a call out against oppression, because that's what was happening at that time. So oppression and its formation of literature, what sort of a relationship does that have, do you think?
In this case, it had a fairly clear relationship, because this was the end of the 1960s. And as you know, the 1960s in the United States and Europe was a time when the younger generation in particular, many of the younger generation, and I was one of those, were very concerned about oppression, imperialism, the dependency of the third world upon the first or the second worlds, as we called them in those days. And in that particular course, we began with W.E.B. Du Bois, who talks about the blacks of America and explains their problems and their legacies. And then also there were other books as well that led up to Malcolm. And when I began...
The Harlem Renaissance at that time.
Right, we were reading from the Harlem Renaissance. And then when I come to Malcolm, Malcolm spoke to me directly in a way that was very profound. First of all, he was from Nebraska. I was also from Nebraska.
Okay.
And he was burned out, his family, by the Ku Klux Klan in Nebraska. I don't think I had even registered that Nebraska had a Ku Klux Klan. And then he goes to Michigan, and my family also had strong ties historically with Michigan. And there his father was killed. So that affected me personally in a way that might not affect other people. And I was riveted by the story. I couldn't put the book down. I began reading it on January the 2nd, 1970. I read it all night long. I didn't sleep that night. Okay. And then when dawn came, when the sunrise came, which I went and opened up my curtains, that my window overlooked Cayuga, Lake Cayuga in Cornell. It was a beautiful, spectacular day, and I sat down and I said, "What did you learn from this book?" And I said, first of all, you learned that God and Allah, or Allah, but we pronounce it as Allah, are the same. That's something that I would have known intellectually, but not emotionally. And also that God guided Malcolm X. So that proves that God exists also, which, not that I had doubts about that, but that was really all I needed. And I think also that maybe not so much answering my questions, but the book showed me that Islam is relevant to you as an American, because Malcolm also says that racism is a cancer eating away at our society, and only Islam could cure that.
Exactly.
And of course, the pilgrimage experience that Malcolm had, which is one of the most beautiful chapters in the book, and I just finished reading that chapter, that shows this power that Islam has to bring all the ethnic groups and races together.
Exactly. Yeah. And that is one of the most important bases of the religion, is it not? Equality. So, you know, if you think about all the things that are going on, and you know, you have your minorities as well in every country. So the Prophet, peace be upon him, he was very, very vocal when it came to minorities and their rights. So how much are we working towards that. How much is that making, as you said, a discontent, you know, in society? What are the remedies? And all this in relation to that very, very important word, tolerance.
Mm-hmm. The society that the Prophet built, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, in Medina was a society that from the very outset, in the Constitution of Medina, recognized the religious diversity in the city. That, of course, was a diversity primarily between Muslims and Jews. Mm. And interestingly, it even refers to them as one ummah together. Mm. And therefore, it emphasized the principle of harmony and of the neighbor and of living together. Mm. And this would become one of the most important principles in Islamic civilization for hundreds and hundreds of years. Mm. That we were people who were able to live with those who did not agree with us. Mm. And we were not only able to tolerate them, but we were able to protect them and to defend them.
Which is such an important aspect, is it not?
Absolutely. And we honored them. In traditional Islamic societies, where you had Jews and Christians and Magians and Hindus and others, it was forbidden by Islamic law that you offend them. And the Prophet ﷺ emphasized the rights of the mu'ahid, of the dhimmi, the person who has with us a covenant, a civic covenant. Mm. And in fact, that covenant could be given by anyone, even an ordinary man, woman, child, even a Muslim who was a fasiq, who was corrupt. And that had to be honored by all. Mm. So traditional Islamic societies were societies in which we respected other human beings and we were able to live with them. And by virtue of this, Islam was able to create a great global civilization. No people, or few people in the past, if any, were able to engage every different ethnic, cultural, and religious group in a dynamic way. Today, it would seem unthinkable that Muslims could do that because of this culturally predatory interpretation of Islam, this ideological Islam that has been developed only over recent decades. But it has been so effective that it's inverted the modalities and the paradigms of what we used to be. Even in World War II, when many Muslims were under colonial rule,
and they fought for
or in the case of Turkey, secular rule, very strict secular rule, Muslims still did more than probably anyone else to protect the Jews that the Nazis were persecuting and to get them to safety. And we did that instinctively as part of our tradition. A Jewish man told us in America, after this documentary was produced by Michael Wolff, called Enemy of the Third Reich, which is about a woman named Noor Khan, who was born in France. Her mother was American, her father was from the subcontinent. And she was brought up in France, but then when the Nazis occupied France, she went to England. She spoke perfect English and French. And Noor Khan, who was a wealthy woman, who didn't have to do anything, she wrote children's stories. She went into Nazi-occupied France to be a telegraph operator, to get Allied pilots that were crashed out of England. And this was a death sentence. And in fact, she survived longer than most, but ultimately the Nazis got her and they executed her. And it's like she had to serve these countries that she believed in. But in World War II, this one Jewish man told us that his family lived in Lyon in France. And when the Nazis occupied, they were after them. So one of his relatives, a man, was running through the streets of Lyon. trying to escape the Nazis, and he saw a Moroccan imam dressed in Moroccan dress, and he ran up to him and he said, "You've got to help me." And the man said to him, "Are you a Jew?" And he said, "I don't know why, but I was honest. I said yes." He said, "Then get inside." And he put him inside the mosque, and he protected him, and he got him out safely. And there are many stories like this.
So, you know, the story that you're narrating and the books that have come out and the things that have been documented, how much of a role does literature have then in promoting the actual true facet of religion?
It's interesting, first of all, that we've always called literature, which the Europeans call literature, which is the letter, the written word. We've always called it adab, which means good character.
Absolutely.
And that's because of the fact that we cultivated literature in order to cultivate people.
Exactly.
And to cultivate good character and to create civilizations. And Muslims did that wherever they went. I was a student of literature, as you know,
Yes.
and of history. And one of my concerns was the death of American poetry and English poetry. And this is something that Ezra Pound, James Joyce, T.S. Eliot, and many others were very concerned about. And it's like the poetic idiom and poetry were of no relevance to the people anymore. When I became a Muslim, I told myself that if Islam were ever to spread among my people, it would revive poetry. And alhamdulillah, with the influx of the immigrants coming from the subcontinent and the Arab world and elsewhere, which really begins in 1965 and then continues, so that we have a large immigrant population and their children, and then also with the phenomenon of conversion, which is quite distinctive in my country, but it's also in other countries. We see exactly that happening, that we have great poets, great poetesses, and they're breathing life into the English language, and they're making it a vehicle for teaching people about themselves and giving them consciousness. So adab to us was always very important. Wherever Islam spread, it enriched the local languages.
Absolutely.
And it always produced languages incredibly capable of profound expression. That's true, of course, with Urdu, and it's true of Punjabi, and it's true of Bengali, and of course taking from Persian and Arabic and Turkish. But wherever Muslims went, this is the case. In China, this happened. In the Swahili speakers of East Africa have epic poetry of the greatest stature. The houses of West Africa have different literary idioms that they cultivated in Hausa, and they have beautiful stories. And they took traditional West African folklore and they made it a vehicle of conveying the Islamic message. And they would take, for example, the baby of the family, which is one of the favorite themes of West African folklore. And you see it in The Lion King. The Lion King is the baby of the family. And the baby of the family will become the Muslim prototype.
Right.
And of course, the baby of the family is threatened by the jackals, by the hyenas, by witches, by spiders and other things. And they will be prototypes of an old idolatrous order. So we were people of great literary capacity. And we had people who loved literature. They loved poetry. And as Rumi says, these words of truth, whether they are the words of revealed language, as in the Quran, or in the words of the Blessed Prophet ﷺ, or whether they are the inspired words of great poets and poetesses, they are capsules of light. And they release to you the light that your heart is capable of receiving according to your own personal growth. So literature is extremely important.
A very powerful.
And so is art. And art and literature were absolutely central to Islam wherever it flourished, wherever it went.
So true. Now, you mentioned Rumi. I wanted to talk about him as well. He is one of the best-selling poets in America right now. So people are, you know, they want to connect with their spiritual side. He has developed a universal audience. He's been able to talk to people from other, you know, divides as well. So the quest is there. The spiritual void that needs to be filled. People are looking towards that, and that's expanding all over the world. With, you know, sort of the material gains that we're achieving and the rat race, the economic empowerment as well, there still remains this hole that has to be filled. Many people are turning towards the Sufi part as well. So tell us about that.
The masters like Rumi and many, many others, and of course the great poet Muhammad Iqbal ranks among the greatest of them all. Hafiz and many others, Amir Khosrow. These people give us the meaning of ourselves and life and the universe we live in. And human beings have to have answers to these questions. In the Islamic tradition, we have a very rich theology, and of course we have a very rich law and legal theory, usul al-fiqh. But our great spiritual masters produce a metaphysics, which is a vision of the realities that underlie all of reality, that has no peer in human history. But metaphysics is something that only few men and women can actually study and master. Sort of like nuclear physics or advanced calculus. But the great artist, architect, for example, or weaver, or poet, could take this metaphysics and express it in the language of beauty so that people could relate to it and people could imbibe it. I know of a man, for example, who came to Pakistan years ago, and he went to visit a particular religious shrine. I think it was in Lahore, but I don't remember, and I don't remember who it was. But this man knew Hafiz, he knew Rumi, and he'd studied the great metaphysicians of Islamic history, and he'd spent decades doing that. But he stayed in that shrine too late, and he came out, and it was very dark. And he didn't know how would he get to his hotel, which was maybe 2 hours walk. And by cart, it would be 40 minutes. And he said, out of nowhere came this old man in one of these Pakistani carts. And he told the man, can you take me to my hotel? He didn't know Urdu, so he spoke to him in Persian. And the man answered in Persian. And because the two languages are compatible, they understood each other. He got then in the cart, and he said the old man's clothes were so humble that you could have bought them in the market at that time for $1. And this man began to recite to him from Rumi and Hafiz. Who was this man? You have treasures in Pakistan.
True.
And he said, I learned more about metaphysics in that 40-minute ride than I had in 30 years of study.
Imagine.
So this is again the ability of the artist.
Connectivity.
And especially the great poet to take these truths and to clothe them in such a way that we can receive those capsules of light. And this is one of the greatest jobs that the artists have.
Right. Now, you know, something there that you said, it was actually the presentation also of this old man who comes across as such an unassuming figure, And then all of a sudden, this enlightenment, this discourse and this change, this intellectual exchange, where you wouldn't think that normally this would happen. So again, you know, humbleness, modesty, simplicity, it is so powerful, is it not? So why are we more inclined, and we're losing that sort of, you know, touch where we can sort of come back to our own roots and be happy and comfortable in who we are for what we are? Why are we running in the rat race then? And why have we forgotten that actually humbleness and less is more?
I think that Muslims have the best beginning of any religious community or civilization in history. And we say traditionally, the beginnings are the manifestations of the ends. Al-bidayatu majjalatu nihayat. So we have a great beginning, and for 1,000 years we worked wonders. But our middle period is our difficult period. And the Prophet ﷺ, he said that my ummah is like the rain, the good rain that gives life to the land. No one will know which was better, the first of it or the last of it. And in other hadith, he told us ﷺ, that good will come to us in the end, like the good of the beginning. I am an optimist, and from the time that I embraced Islam in 1970, I've had great confidence that this religion is the way forward and that it will be able to find itself again. But I think that the colonial period and the post-colonial periods have been for us extremely traumatic. And everything was done to destroy our culture, our faith, our civilization. Our scholars, for example, in the traditional world of Islam, were people who were wealthy and independent. They had awqaf, they had endowments. One of the things that was done in the colonial and post-colonial period was to remove those awqaf, so that the scholars become often impoverished. And then also, often Islamic scholarship doesn't attract the kind of people that it used to attract in the past. So we have to revive the spirit of Islam. And as you said, our civilization was based in humility, in ubudiyya, and in tawadu'. And good character, which is so important. Good character is what opens the keys of heaven, opens the doors of heaven. Good character is based in humility and then respect of the other. Every aspect of good character is based in that. We also say that the tree of love, meaning here essentially the love of God. And the love of God is implanted in our hearts. It's part of our fitrah, of our primordial self. But the root of the tree of love is humility.
Yes.
And the trunk of that tree is knowledge, especially the knowledge of God. Or we could say knowledge of the beloved. And the branches of that tree are haya, which is not really shame. Haya is the imperative to do things in the best possible way. And then its fruit is obedience. And we say that it's watered by dhikr, by the remembrance of God the Beloved. So humility is really, really important. And humility is also the basis of self-consciousness and of honesty with ourselves and knowledge of our Creator.
Of course. You know, what you're emphasizing on is so important. The things that we're overlooking, because so many other things are being sort of, you know, focused upon. The character of a person is their definition, a definition of who they are, not just for themselves, but for the world around them, for their family, for their loved ones, for everyone. Now, does it not seem that the people who are of a more sort of a reflective character, or who have understood all the things that are required to be of a noble character, they fall into a more silent zone, and the noise is usually coming from all the people who are actually, you know, spiritually inadequate, or in character. You know, there's a lot more that needs to be done there. And so why are we identifying noise and all that thing, everything like that, with strength? And whereas when we talk about Sufism as well, they talk about silence, they talk about meditation, they talk about connecting again. So how about that?
That's a very, very important observation. I think that one of the most important things is that these great men and women of ihsan, these men and women who sought to worship God in the most perfect way, as if they could see Him, they were the cultivators of adab, of literature,
Again,
and then also of humility. And they taught people courtesies. And the Sufi orders, especially in their greatest days, here in the subcontinent and around the Muslim world, were devoted to the service of the people. Here in Pakistan, for example, you still have a number of langars in which people can come to eat.
Yeah.
And no one asks them, even if they're hungry, they don't ask them, are you a Muslim? What is your sect? They don't ask them, are you even
eligible
hungry?
for this?
They don't ask them anything.
Exactly.
It's sit down and eat. And so traditionally, we taught good character and courtesy through practice. We also, of course, taught it through our literature and other things as well. The voice of arrogance is a voice that is hollow.
Okay, I'm going to ask you that question again right now. We're going for a break, so don't change the channel. Stay with us. Okay, welcome back. Before we went to the break, I was asking you about the voice of arrogance. So can you throw some light upon that?
I could really speak about that more specifically in the context of my own country. And perhaps that's even more appropriate. The 1960s, of course, saw the civil rights movement. And one of the most important objectives of that was to get rid of the doctrine of white supremacy and racism. In the 1970s and into the 1980s, there were very concerted attempts at creating a culture of civility and not saying certain things, not speaking in certain ways, not offending people, not dividing people, but trying to unite them. Unfortunately, in the 1990s and into this century, the right wing in particular began to cultivate uncivil discourse. And it began to do things that were unthinkable before, outrageous before. And of course, our last election was an example of that, of playing the white supremacy card and saying things that had become unspeakable.
Exactly.
So this divides society. And people get out of it certain short-term benefits.
And that was sort of a Pandora's box, was it not?
It is a Pandora's box because where it ends, no one knows. And when you let out these dogs, they ultimately bite everyone. So I think that in the Muslim world, we have many people who speak the language of hate. They speak the language of arrogance and lack of self-consciousness, which is untrue completely to the letter and spirit of our religion. And I think that we have to bear in mind the fact that they are alienating, although they're dividing our societies and their rhetoric empowers certain people as opposed to others. But in the end, they're also alienating millions. So this is why I think in our Islamic world, we have this problem of people simply checking out of Islam, because the voices they hear speaking about Islam are so irrational, so unreasonable, so impolite, and sometimes even vulgar, that they don't want that religion anymore. And it's very important for us to seek to restore the normalcy of civility and of intelligent discourse. And this is what our civilization was based on. We were a civilization that welcomed intellectual discourse, not just among Muslims, but among Muslims and non-Muslims and others.
Exactly.
And we need to get that back, and we have to have, I think this is very much an issue of leadership. That where are the leaders who can guide us in this respect? Because they have an obligation to do that.
Of course.
And one of the things that is said about the media, we of course live in the age of the media. And the media is multiplying different forms all the time. But one of the principles of the media is that you cannot affect the people if you do not cover all the bases. So you have to use every type of media available. And I think that those of us who seek to represent a normative, reasonable, authentic discourse, and who, inshallah, have a pedigree, who've taken from traditional scholars with authorization, we have the responsibility to do this, and to try to, and not to leave a vacuum where these other voices, you know, can bring about great harm and continue to do that.
Right. And as you've said, that, you know, that's such a huge responsibility, and for somebody who's in a position to take that knowledge forward and present it in a way that it's appealing to others. Tell us about your trips around the world, the people you've been able to communicate with, the people you've been able to sort of, you know, get through and change their perspective as well. How have you dealt with the issue of tackling Islamophobia?
Islamophobia is, of course, a huge problem in my country, the United States of America, and in the Western countries in particular. And now, in fact, it's spreading even to other countries, even to South America, even to China and to Japan and elsewhere. This is a really difficult issue, especially because of the fact that those who promote Islamophobia are people that have access to every aspect of media, and they have billions of dollars, and they have an agenda.
Of course.
Because this fear of Islam, it
serves their interest.
It serves their interest. It justifies things like political intervention.
Of course.
And
because
then it's also
just a pretext to other avenues that are thought of beforehand.
So we're up against a very, very daunting challenge. And may we use our resources. We have among us today a number of scholars who are very gifted, and spokesmen and spokeswomen. and it's very important to cultivate them. It's also said that ideas have to have human faces. So if we go back to the civil rights movement in my own country, the face of the civil rights movement and the voice of it was Dr. Martin Luther King. And the fact that he was able to give the movement a face is one of the main reasons for its success.
True.
So we have to also be conscious of that, that we need to find men and women who can be effective voices and faces for the truth and for a positive discourse. And also, I think we have to be very careful not to be in a reactive mode. In other words, we can't just be reacting to what is being done or what is being said. And Islamophobia also feeds on the fact that we have among us various radical groups that call themselves Muslim, who are engaging in acts of barbarity beyond words that human beings wouldn't even do. How could you do this in the name of Islam?
Again, serving their own political agenda.
And again, they're serving political agendas. And often they're serving the political agenda of the West. This is something we should never lose sight of, because the things that they do definitely play into the hand of the Islamophobes. So we have to do something very positive. It's also said that that which is set wrong by action can only be set right by action. So we also need to have dynamic activities and programs, taking care of the poor, taking care of the land, and things like, for example, environmental concerns. Islam has some of the greatest environmental legislation ever. And in Islam, we have the rights of human beings, حقوق العباد. We have the rights of God, حقوق Allah, which are actually what we call human rights. Human rights are actually حقوق Allah, they're the rights of God. And we have the rights, حقوق البهائم والحيوانات. We have the rights of animals and livestock.
Absolutely.
And we have the rights of water and of land.
Right. I'm going to have to interrupt you right now. We're going for a break, but we'll be back. Don't change the channel, remember. Welcome back to the program. Dr. Umar Faruq, we were speaking about Islamophobia and how to deal with it, also the impact of the media. And you were, telling us some things that are very, very important information.
One of the things that we have to do is to be proactive and not to be reactive. And we need to find very good things to do that are beneficial and that are inshallah sincere. But we can't just be reacting to a bad situation. And as I was saying, Islam has some of the greatest environmental legislation ever. And therefore to be actively involved in that is something very proactive and very good. And it also wins us allies among some of the best elements of human society today. Another thing about Islamophobia that we must remember is the fact that it does serve also as a smokescreen, so that while focusing the attention of certain countries, especially Western countries, on a very small minority of Muslims who are these violent radicals who do not represent 1 in 100,000 of us.
Exactly.
Then also they take away attention from other big problems like right-wing violence. And the development of the right wing in my country and in Europe is also a very significant threat to our societies. So we should talk about that as well. Then also there are things as well like the economy and other issues that need to be talked about as well. So We have to use the means that we have, and we have to use them very intelligently. And I hope that we will be successful, that we'll find ways to do that.
Right, exactly. So, you know, when we talk about taking this a step further, being proactive instead of as against reactive. So basically, all of us are an ambassador. We're working as ambassadors of our religion. In the early days when Islam was spreading, it was spread a lot through example, through practice, through people, as things you've mentioned, character, integrity, humility, empathy. All these things were characteristic of our religion, and people used to ask, you know, that the code of conduct that a group of Muslims used to have in the early days when Islam was spreading, and they used to say, who are these people? You know, they respect the way they speak, the way they behave, the way they conduct themselves. That was the main reason that people were attracted towards the religion. So another thing taking that further is that, you know, basically, instead of worrying about all those people around us, the main person you have to start with is yourself.
Mm-hmm. If you're going to set things right, which in Arabic we call islah, then first you have to be right. You have to be salih. So if we were to talk about having what is called an Islamic State, I have to be very careful about using that word today because of its misuse. But what about the Islamic State in me?
Exactly.
Do I have an Islamic State in me? Everything begins with the heart. It is the heart which God addresses, and that heart has to be sound. The Salaf as-Salih, the upright Muslims of the first generations, were all of them fundamentally concerned about the heart. They understood the heart, and they understand, and they would even say that we don't pay so much attention to people who pray a lot and fast a lot, even though they did pray a lot and they fasted a lot. But the whole issue is salamatu sadr, soundness of the heart, wa sakha an-nafs, overflowing generosity of the soul, and an-nushu lil khalq, and giving good advice and setting good examples for all creation. So this is who we were. Muslims in the past, wherever they went, were able to solve problems that no one else could. In Europe, for example, when Islam came into Sicily and into Spain and Portugal, one of the many things that it did was to abolish feudalism. So that was a service to the people at large. In West Africa, Islam was able to create a huge international market in a very tribal society. In the subcontinent, Islam was able to address the issue of caste and of caste preferences. So we should be people who are identifying the needs of others and who are meeting those needs. And today those needs are very, very great.
Absolutely.
In my own country, we have problems of poverty. Many people might not know that, but we have homeless people in our cities. We have other problems, rat infestation. My own city of Chicago has the highest rate of rat infestation of any city in the United States. We have problems of suicide. We have problems of many other things. Human beings have to be given meaning in their life. And this is what we ought to be about. And I hope that we will be successful in that. Human beings are fundamentally religious. And we were created to worship God. We were created to know Him and to love Him. And if we take a substitute for that, we will make it into an idol, because we will put in it the kind of love and energy and commitment that is true for God. But human beings have to have a meaningful religious expression in any society or time they live in. And this is one of the main things that is expected from us in this age that we live in.
Dr. Umar Faruq Abdullah, it's been a pleasure having you on the program, and it's been a really enriching journey in everything you've talked about, you know, opening up the heart and the generosity of the soul. It's going to make such an impact with, you know, I've really learned so much, and our viewers as well. Just before we go, a very short message for our viewers, and, you know, how anybody who is trying, who's battling with themselves, who's trying to find that spirituality. Just a short few words for them.
You have to have good company. We say in Arabic, "An-nafsu lin-nafsi tasriq," that the soul steals for itself from other souls.
That is so true.
We are gregarious animals. We're affected by the company we keep.
So true.
And you have to find good company and keep it. And also, those of us who are able have to give good company also. This is not a religion of hermits or of monks hidden away in monasteries. It is a religion of service and love, and this is the message of, and this is the action of the great Muslims of the past.
Fantastic.
And may we be able to revive these incredible legacies.
Fantastic. Absolutely wonderful. Thank you once again.
Thank you very much.
Okay, so a man is known by the company he keeps. You know, one of the very important things that Dr. Umar has given this message to our viewers, and absolutely agree with that. We're all here to share, actually, share feelings, joys, sorrows, and help each other, you know, with all the burdens that life comes across. And there's so much there that we can, there's a treasure chest waiting to be opened. So until next time, see you. Bye-bye.